Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I must determine my friend there in West and Bernard Nordich, and they've always said that you should have a number of speeches ready, depending on the agenda item. But Madam Speaker, I was so elated this morning when I saw you. I was preparing my speech, and suddenly don't start that clock yet. I can need every second. And suddenly, I saw you came in with the type of energy I did not exuberate since the age of 18. And I said, I must find out what you did, what you ate. Some say you had sickness, but if you had sickness,
all kinds.
My God, I don't mind that type of
Terminal
sickness.
all kinds.
But Madam Speaker, I am happy to see you back. I'm happy to see you back. You were greatly missed. Madam Speaker, these are serious times in our country. They began in September 2019 during my administration, when we were hit by the strongest storm in our nation's history. Dorian ravaged the northern Bahamas, and the pandemic came just 6 months later. It required historic levels of borrowing to sustain our economy when global travel nearly halted. Debt levels increased for countries around the world. The repeated rounds of stimulus by major economies contributed to the current inflation problem, which has been compounded by persistent global supply instability. Then in February of this year, a war broke out between Russia and Ukraine. This sent energy and commodity prices up even more. Other events in the national arena are adding to global instability. It is unlikely that the world will return anytime soon to the relative calm we knew in the past few decades. Madam Speaker, the Bahamas needs wise leadership in these times, and sadly, we do not have that with this Prime Minister and his New Day administration. His focus is on travel and having a good time. There is no seriousness. The challenges facing the country appear to be too much for him to handle. And under its energy policy, in the PLP's Blueprint for Change, the now governing party promised in its first bullet point to, I quote, ensure reliable sources of affordable, sustainable energy and move to reduce the reliance on fossil fuel, end quote. With the heartless increase in electricity bills announced earlier this month, we can now say the Prime Minister has broken his pledge. The Prime Minister also promised he would brainstorm and come up with a solution to help Bahamians regarding energy prices. He gave the impression that his administration would help. Now we know that promise too was mere empty rhetoric. Instead, he increased electricity bills for at least the next year to a year and a half. I say at least the next year to a year and a half because he has no plan to bring down the cost after all. I warn Bahamians that this Prime Minister may have to announce even more dramatic electricity increases when these hikes come to an end. He is making a policy as he goes along. It has become obvious that he does not know what to do. He does not understand how to make a sensible plan, even though in opposition he liked to talk about plans, plans, plans. That's all we heard coming from this side, plans. The announced electricity increases are extraordinary. For working Bahamians, the bills are going up. For businesses, the bills are going up. The headline and subheadline of the Nassau Guardian story of October 5th, 2022 says it all. Quote, Prime Minister announces BPL price hike, fuel charge on bills to almost triple for tens of thousands, end quote. My administration put in place a hedge strategy at BPL to help protect Bahamians from high prices on the international markets. Now, Madam Speaker, I must say that all backup documents I would sign and adopt, and they are available. This administration has mishandled the situation, and Bahamians now face punishing increases in their electricity bills. Madam Speaker, I could remember sitting on that side when the members had comments about us discussing about increasing electricity bills. I refer to an article, Cooper, additional BPL charges shameless. That's the headline. Madam Speaker, I refer to the article. The then deputy leader, who's now deputy prime minister, stated, Hubert Minnis and the FNM have zero respect for Bahamian people. They don't care about the Bahamian people at all. How do you put this BPL tax on people and look them in the face and tell them you have their best interests? The Minister of Finance says the new BPL tax will be palatable to Bahamians. Cooper said, first, what Bahamians does he know who feel good about paying more money to BPL? Who is he talking to? No one wants to pay BPL a red cent more, end quote. He said on, this is really shameful stuff, he said. But Madam Speaker, this makes it worse. I don't like this new BPL tax. It is an affront to Bahamians and could threaten to drive us into another recession. How could they possibly think higher bills makes any sense? He said, I guess it's the people's time. But Madam Speaker, the people's time, I'm going to table it. Put my 2 seconds back. The people's time was increasing BPL's bill by 30%. It's a new day who's increasing it by 163%. So, Madam Speaker, it's not the people's time. It's a new day, 163%. Madam Speaker, if 30% increase will take you into a recession, only God knows where 167% will take us.
Depression.
It is intolerable. It is a nightmare, atrocious and egregious. Mrs. Speaker, Madam Speaker, it will take us straight into hell with the summer coming soon. And Madam Speaker, I only want to read, we had a plan. We had a plan. I want to read from an email communication, December 9th, 2020. I have to speed up. To the chairman, the hedges approved by the board were finally executed as per the final orders below. Our settled price was below the maximum premium price granted to IDB. These new hedges allow BPL to have a fuel charge at or below 11.5 cents per kilowatt hour through March 2024, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I can explain our entire process and plan at the end if time allows, but I won't get tied up in that. We are here today to debate the Value-Added Tax Amendment number 2, 2022. The bill seeks to amend the Value-Added Tax Act 2014 to increase the sum for a zero-related supply of electricity from $300 or below to $400 or below per billing cycle. I support the amendment. Don't get me wrong, I support the amendment. But let me be clear. This bill is an attempt by the Prime Minister to try to save face after a spectacular failure to protect Bahamian electricity consumers 163%. A new day. What was amazing, no, I can't be distracted yet. After instituting a historic increase in the price Bahamians will have to pay for electricity, the Prime Minister is increasing the VAT exemption threshold by $100 in an effort to say, at least he did something. The Bahamian people expect more of their Prime Minister than this. Yes, they do. First, the Prime Minister instituted the Davis breadbasket tax. He did not have to do this. He chose to tax foods and medicines that were VAT exempt. And secondly, the gas prices soared and the opposition asked the Prime Minister to temporarily cut the gas taxes to give Bahamians some relief. He refused. His choice was not to help Bahamians. Now the Prime Minister has announced a historic rise in electricity prices at a time when many Bahamians are just trying to make ends meet. He announced the increase just before Christmas. My chaps are already complaining about the shacks. You can't keep the lights on. Junkanous. This is an uncaring administration out of touch with the struggles and needs of most Bahamians. This is a Prime Minister, Madam Speaker, who is focused on his fun trips around the world at taxpayers' expense. He and his out-of-control press secretary are busy seeing the world in luxurious hotels, eating big-time food, while our people wonder how they will find money to pay BPL. Bahamians should take note that the Prime Minister is not focused on hard-working families. The new day he promised means a good life for him and his crew. Madam Speaker, the brave Davis electricity increase will have negative impacts on our economy. The price of electricity is factored into the cost of all goods and services. The Prime Minister's electricity increase will make inflation worse. Remember, when we were increasing it with a plan at 30%.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for South Beach.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I didn't want to interrupt while he was making his presentation, but I truly believe that his presentation at this point is a bit misleading. In that, he was absent this morning when the member for Fort Charlotte mentioned the components of the BPL bill.
You don't want me going for it, Charlie.
Components of the BPL bill are 1, the base rate, 2, the fuel charge, and 3, VAT costs. The fuel cost or the fuel charge by law is a pass-through. It is the cost of fuel that is passed through and given directly to the consumer. So to insert, Madam Speaker, to insert that the Prime Minister himself or this administration has hiked the cost of electricity, it's totally misleading. All right? The increase with regards to electricity is as a result of natural causes and the costs related to inflation throughout the world. Thank you, and I think he should be more honest in his presentation.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member, you may continue.
Madam Speaker, I won't be derailed. I won't be derailed, so I would save this page for the end. No, this is a private book. Businesses, Madam Speaker, will have more of their resources tied up in paying electricity. New investors, seeing the escalating energy costs in the Bahamas, may think hard about coming here. The amendment before us will not prevent these effects. I support the amendment because every little bit helps towards small businesses. The problem is the New Day administration has messed up the wider management of BPL and oversight of the energy sector. The Bahamas needs broad energy sector reform. The Bahamas needs a bigger, bolder, and faster set of investment in renewable energy to reduce our dependency on fossil fuel. I support the Prime Minister when he announced the BPL solar project for New Providence. However, that alone is not enough. Reducing the cost, and listen carefully, reducing the cost of electricity would be one of the biggest stimulus efforts for our economy. It would create more jobs. It would give businesses more capital to invest in our country. It would lessen the pressure on households across our Commonwealth. And this cabinet should be in meetings trying to come up with the solutions. They have thus far failed, but they must try harder. It might be the Deputy Prime Minister, maybe the Deputy Prime Minister needs to take this charge. This is especially the case considering that the Prime Minister has so badly bungled the issue. And of course, because he's constantly out of country, including on unnecessary joyrides and trips. Madam Speaker, last week the Prime Minister was out of the country yet again. The recent trip by the Prime Minister and his delegation to Bermuda was ill-conceived. It has turned into a major embarrassment for the Bahamas. The government and the PLP need to answer a number of questions so that the Bahamian people can understand what happened. There appears to be a lack of clarity. Look at my folder, the one with that big heavy clip, because we open him out again. Pull that one from here. The one with the big heavy clip. Big heavy clip. The Nassau Guardian, the one with the big heavy clip. The big heavy clip. This is your file. The Nassau Guardian reported on October 21st that the Director of Communications at the Office of the Prime Minister stated that the trip was paid for by the Progressive Liberal Party. An editorial in yesterday's Guardian noted, quote, when responding to a question by the Nassau Guardian about who paid for the trip, the communications director said, insofar as the Bermuda trip, that cost was covered by the Progressive Liberal Party, and all questions pertaining to that trip can be deferred to that organization. In October 24th edition of the Tribune, the Foreign Minister, who is also chairman of the PLP, is reported as saying, I quote, the standard procedure is, for most, if not all, flights of the Prime Minister to be arranged through the office of the Prime Minister. When settlement of expenses are done, there is a reckoning between personal expenses and public expenses. That procedure was followed in this case, and there is nothing unusual about it. Why were there two accounts, end quote, why were there two accounts or versions as to who paid for the trip? What procedure was followed? As in the words of the foreign minister, a reckoning between personal expenses and public expenses. What was the reckoning? Bahamians should not be misled or confused. The Tribune story, Krishna Virgil reported, quote, the foreign minister over the weekend said the trip was a standard official visit to another country at the invitation of the Premier of Bermuda, E. David Burt, who is also the leader of Bermuda's Progressive Labor Party. The minister is quoted in the story. It was a standard foreign affairs goodwill trip, not a political trip, end quote. Wow. If it was a government trip, why did the Progressive Liberal Party pay for it? Moving forward, this suggests that the PLP should now pay for foreign trips when invited by another government for a standard foreign affairs goodwill trip. The foreign minister was also quoted as saying, he, Prime Minister, was able to solidify relations on a party-to-party basis with the next generation of leaders of the Bahamas and Bermuda, end quote. That is clearly very political, not government to government, but party to party. The Prime Minister addressed a political convention of the Progressive Labor Party in Bermuda. This is standard for a foreign affairs goodwill trip, end quote. It was blatantly political. What the Prime Minister did was a grave exception. Sitting prime ministers should not go to another jurisdiction and address a party's political convention. The PLP can't seem to distinguish between themselves and the Bahamian state. It got worse. In its October 21st edition, the Royal Gazette reported, quote, Bermuda has nothing to fear from cutting links with Britain and becoming an independent state, according to a visiting politician. It went on. Prime Minister Philip Brave Davis, the Prime Minister of the Bahamas, is on island as a guest of the Progressive Labor Party, which opened its annual delegates conference last night. The Gazette quoted Mr. Davis, I quote, it is for the community to decide whether they wish to have their own independent country so that the will of the people cannot be thwarted by others. Then he went on and said, I think there's a universal right for a person to determine his or her own destiny, both individually and collectively, not influenced by any outside influences, end quote. The story noted that the Prime Minister was a guest of the Progressive Labor Party. The story demonstrated that the Prime Minister was interfering in the politics and domestic affairs of Bermuda. This was a highly partisan political trip. In his comments, the Prime Minister seemed to be advocating for independence for Bermuda. The topic of independence for Bermuda is a controversial issue in the jurisdiction with competing viewpoints. It is not for the Bahamas government to tell Bermuda what to do. It is not for the Bahamas Prime Minister to tell Bermuda political party what to do. The irony, Madam Speaker, hypocrisy and arrogance is that the Prime Minister said that outside influences should not interfere in the affairs of Bermuda, even as he was doing exactly that, interfering in their businesses. A letter to the Royal Gazette, that appeared yesterday took the Prime Minister to task for not understanding the history of Bermuda and for interfering in local affairs. I am told that Bermuda is looking at the Bahamas as a joke. Madam Speaker, there is a debate in the Bahamas as to whether we should become a republic. Imagine a prime minister from another Caribbean country, and I say this to Bahamians. Imagine a prime minister from another Caribbean country coming to the Bahamas, speaking at the convention of a political party, and then telling the press the Bahamas should not fear becoming a republic. Madam Speaker, Bahamians, including the leadership of the PLP, would be outraged by such a partisan political intervention in our domestic affairs. Throughout its history, the PLP, including some in senior positions today, have been forceful in insisting that our countries and jurisdictions that other countries and jurisdictions do not interfere in Bahamian politics. Madam Speaker, I want to repeat that. Throughout its history, the PLP, including some in senior positions today, have been forceful in insisting that other countries and jurisdictions do not interfere in Bahamian politics. Yet, here was the Bahamian Prime Minister interfering in the domestic affairs of another jurisdiction. Further, sitting prime ministers must avoid being involved in or seen to be involved in the internal affairs and politics of a political party overseas. This was a display of recklessness and irresponsible behavior by our prime minister, who is increasingly an embarrassment on the world stage. The man who says he is concerned, I expected you to get up.
The chair recognizes Vice President.
The Prime Minister of the Bahamas is by no means an embarrassment on the world stage. And you have nothing to prove that. That's an opinion that you might have, but that is not true. The Prime Minister has been celebrated on the world stage by the comments he made, whether it's at COP or at the United Nations. Our Prime Minister has made this nation proud.
Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member.
Thank you. You guys shut up. Thank you very much, Rustem.
Members,
The man who says he is concerned about climate change was a big-time lawyer for an oil drilling company. After this government messed up on the recent blacklisting, the Prime Minister went to the United Nations and said things that should be said in more diplomacy. The Prime Minister is out of his depth on domestic affairs, economic affairs, and international affairs. Madam Speaker, a number of other questions have to be raised about this trip. Did the aircraft the Prime Minister and his delegation was on lose communication with the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration New York Air Route Traffic Control Center at any time? And for how long? And why? Was it 1 hour? Was it an hour and a half? Further, Madam Speaker, just to explain, if communication is lost, mean there must have been some problem with the HF capacity. And only the VHF is working. The VHF is what came on about an hour and a half later and logged into Bermuda, which meant that though the US can track the plane by radar, they cannot communicate because of the dysfunction or lack of HF capacity. And as a result of that, should anything have happened to that plane, there would not have been any communication, though they could have pinpointed. But Madam Speaker, it's technical, and I can get into that at another time. Further, have any fines been levied because of this trip? If so, what is the fine? Is there a fine? How much is the fine? West End, is it 100,000? I don't know. West End? Is it 100,000? Madam Speaker, from beginning to end, the Bermuda trip was proved to be an embarrassment for the Bahamas and the Davis administration. The least they can do is to come clean with all the facts and apologize to the people of the Bahamas and the people of Bermuda for their terrible behavior. Madam Speaker, this government is out of control, reckless, irresponsible at home and abroad. Lawlessness appears to be increasing, being led by this government. Minister accused of assaulting an officer. We cannot get a report. All you need is the medical report. It takes months to get a medical report. It speaks for itself. A minister issuing over 600 taxi plates, yet the law was not followed, was not gazetted. Lawlessness. And when a government leads in lawlessness, for God's sake, what do you expect us to do? The people, we follow the leader. And if you are lawless, the society becomes lawless. Crime increases. Everything is looked at as normal. A government who refused to follow the procurement law, the procurement bill. A minister who violates part 1 of the cabinet manual, and we hear nothing about it. Madam Speaker, I thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Member Asmini. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Ingliston.
Thank you very much. That's okay. I'll be all right. Oh, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I want to join the voices in welcoming you back.
Thank you, Honorable
No,
Member.
that's not mine. Yes, seeing you today was a beautiful sight. Walk across this floor.
Thank you. Thank you.